to be worse in the first few months of 2020. A third of people also say their finances have deteriorated over the last 3 months, and 20% are saving less money. Well, the financial advisor and economist Jonathan Davis joins me now. Jonathan, very good evening to you. There is a kind of storm gathering, isn't there, in many regards? In fact, it's already starting to batter us, and that is the rising cost of living, which is outpacing earnings.
Indeed, entirely down to government and Bank of England policies, unfortunately. The powers that be, as they say, they have decided that they want inflation, and they're getting it. To give one example, the biggest input to the inflation index is the price of oil, not the price at the pump, but a barrel of oil on the world stage. And a year and a half ago, a barrel of oil was $20. It's now $75. So it's gone up 250, 300%. And that, of course, goes directly into inflation. This computer I'm speaking to you on, my phone, the cover of my iPad there, everything is plastic. And everything is oil, which goes into plastic, is what I meant to say. And oil is probably going to rise for many, many years. And again, that's government policies because they're stopping oil companies from producing oil. So that's one example. And yes, if interesting, the stats that you said, if only a third are seeing their finances deteriorating, well, that's interesting. That just tells me that 2/3 aren't watching.
You very deliberately there hit upon essentially blaming government in some ways for inflation. Do you think then the kind of stimulus packages during this pandemic have been unnecessary or too much?
Darren, it's not just the last 2 years. For how long have we had interest rates at effectively zero? For how long have they been saying oil and gas companies can't search for oil and gas? And we've got to spend more on renewables, which are incredibly expensive ways of producing energy. So yes, I do hit upon the government and the Bank of England because it's their stated policy. We call it financial repression. And actually, maybe your viewers have been interested in a brief history lesson. It appears to me that we're now in the beginnings of a similar period or era since just after World War II and the late 1970s. In other words, 30 years of financial repression, which ended, as many of your listeners will know, with 25% per annum inflation by the mid-1970s. Now, the governments, the free spending governments and their accomplices at the Bank of England could easily have taken action over 30 years to, mitigate all that, but they didn't. And here we are again. They want inflation. They know that the level of debt overall in society, the level of debt to the size of the economy, so debt to GDP, they know that it's far too high to be any longer sustainable. And they have a number of options to reduce debt to GDP. They could default on the debt. They could say to the lenders, go away, we're not going to pay you. Well, they're not going to do that. They're not going to become financial pariahs. They're not going to raise taxes to kingdom come because that doesn't win votes. So instead, they're going to inflate us all out of it. But it means that 95% of the population are going to be hit hard for many, many years. And actually, I think for decades, as I've just been explaining, we are going to be in financial repression, and the standards of living for the bulk of the population is going to be falling for years. In fact, I just wrote to my clients and said that I expect within 5 years, most folk will see their standard of living fall by about 20%. And this is just the beginning.
Quite dramatic stuff indeed. You seem to be suggesting that The governments have got the ability to control this, something that you clearly don't want to see happen. What could change? What could we do? What can governments do? What needs to be done?
Why don't I want to see governments take action? I don't know where you got that from.
No. I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting that you seem to think that governments could do something to prevent this dramatic fall in people's living. I'm asking you what they should do, but you seem to be suggesting they're not inclined to do that.
Oh no, it's what they want. They want the financial repression. Do not think for one moment that politicians and bureaucrats work for us. They work for the top 5%. You may think by hearing that I must be some Marxist revolutionary. No, I'm a free market capitalist. And it's my reading of history and reading of economics which leads me to that very clear conclusion. So what could governments do? Well, I've given you one simple example. They could stop taking our money in taxes and giving it to the green, the climate change lobby. For example, let the oil and gas companies do what they do, find more oil and gas, which will increase supply and therefore will bring down the price of oil. But instead, they're doing exactly the opposite. I can tell you, Darren, I can tell you, viewers, because it's already set in stone. The chap just before, the estate agent was saying interest rates are very, very low. And you know what? They are going to stay low for as long as you can imagine. They may rise a bit. Indeed, in this month, they rose from 0.1 to 0.25%, pure window dressing. Interest rates are going to stay low for quote ever, and in order to produce higher and higher inflation, because the government and the bureaucrats are desperate over the next 20 or 30 years, like they did from the late 40s to the late 70s, to get debt to GDP back down to those levels that they had 40 years ago. It's set in stone.
Okay, well, we'll come back to you next year and the year after, and we'll see how it pans out. Jonathan, appreciate your time. Happy New Year to you and to all your loved ones. Jonathan Davis there, financial advisor and economist, talking about the rising cost of living concerns. Certainly that a lot of people are going to see strains on their finances in the months to come. Do get in touch if that is you, particularly energy prices, of course, rising quite dramatically at the moment. GV Views at gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. Do get in touch with us on this Thursday evening. We're going to take a quick break there, though. We'll be back with some of the rest of today's top stories just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.